back then could do something that would perplex us today with modern machinery.
Yeah.
And that somehow or another they figured this out. It's almost like what they had done was leave behind something that was so stupendous, so monstrously impressive that it would transcend time.
Yeah.
And that you would have to look at it even thousands and thousands of years later and say, hey, like this defies conventional explanation. This is not a simple, and I've seen some of the conventional explanations of the construction of the pyramid, and they conveniently neglect those chambers above the king's chamber.
They do.
They conveniently neglect a lot of those massive stones.
Yeah.
And it's because it's one of those things you just go, oh, I don't know. What is this, Jamie?
They're the chambers above the king's chambers, and each one of those floors consists of a row of 70-ton granite blocks that have been raised 350 feet above the ground, and not only that, but brought from Aswan in the south of Egypt, 500 kilometers south of the Great Pyramid. So,
if there's any time in history where you could go in a time machine and go back and observe, would that be the time?
I am just completely fascinated by the Ice Age at the moment.
If you had one shot to go back and see what it was like in some place, you wouldn't go to the construction of the Great Pyramids?
I think right now where I'd go is 12,800 years ago in the beginning of the Younger Dryas.
Just to see.
Because I think that's where the whole human story changes. I think that's where we change tracks from one path to another path. And following those cataclysmic events of the Younger Dryas between 12,800 and 11,600 years ago, following those, the signs of civilization that we see emerging are not the beginnings of civilization. They're a restarting of civilization that had existed before the cataclysm. And for that reason, I would like to be present during that cataclysmic event, if only to satisfy myself that it was indeed a comet. You see, the one thing there's no dispute about anymore is that the Younger Dryas was a cataclysm. You can't argue about that. The megafauna that die off, the disruption of human activity that takes place at that time, the huge climate changes. This was a cataclysm by any standards. Where the argument still goes on is what caused the cataclysm. I vote strongly for comet, multiple fragments of a comet hitting the North American ice cap and hitting Greenland as well. But there are other researchers in the field, like my colleague Robert Schoch, who thinks that the sun is more involved. This is healthy. This is very, very healthy, that we should be approaching this problem from many different perspectives and trying to figure out what the fuck caused this extraordinary event that occurs at a pivotal moment in the human story. The end of the Stone Age, the beginning of the Mesolithic, the end of the Ice Age, the beginning of the current age of the Earth. And suddenly we see these signs of civilization appearing, and in places like Göbekli Tepe, those signs already include highly sophisticated knowledge. And that's why I feel we really need to investigate the Amazon. There are three places in the world which are really lacking in the investigation right now. One of them is the Amazon, 5.5 million square kilometers, very little archaeology done. Another is the Sahara Desert. The Sahara Desert, tough place to work. I can understand why there's little archaeology done there, but the Sahara Desert was green during the Ice Age. It had a completely different climate regime. We should consider the possibility that missing parts of the human story are there. And then under the continental shelves, because sea level rose 400 feet. These are three domains that archaeology has largely not investigated, and it has largely not done so. They say, well, why would we spend the money on marine archaeology? It's much better to spend it on looking for shipwrecks rather than looking for signs of a lost civilization, because we archaeologists know there was no lost civilization. So that's the argument for the resources there, and the same with the Amazon, and the same with the Sahara Desert. Very places in the world that those amongst us who are charged with the responsibility of interpreting the past have not looked at are the very places we should be looking at.
I had a thought once while I was under the influence, and it was a thought that one day computational powers will reach a point where they will be able to take into consideration all of the objects on Earth and what we know about the history and vividly recreate the past through computation, to the point where you could actually know who did what, when people did things, and that, I mean, I don't even know if this would be physical. Today, certainly not be possible, but with the exponential increase in computational power and technology and innovation, that one day we'll reach a point where you'll be able to watch you'll be able to see what happened.
Yeah.
And they'll be able to recreate what happened exactly. And that this would be something that would be, I mean, it's impossible for us to imagine that someone would be able to do that right now.
Yeah.
But that one day with technology, as it gets more and more advanced, we will reach some sort of some innovation or some sort of an invention that will allow us to go back and literally see what happened, how things were done.
Technology is changing our whole understanding of the past, and what you're envisaging is perfectly possible. We will come to a time, if we
100 years, 500 years.
Perhaps less. Yeah. If we don't, first destroy ourselves entirely as a civilization, we will come to a time where our cleverness and our techniques will allow a much wider opening up of the past than has presently happened. But it is already happening. One of the areas of science that I go into in America before is genetics and DNA. This is an area of science that was not much informing archaeology until about the 1990s. But since the 2000s has become very important in archaeology because the technology has been developed where ancient DNA can be extracted and tested, and you can actually genotype an entire individual from DNA that may be 15, 20,000 years old. And this new technology of genome sequencing and DNA is another factor that is raising huge question marks over the past of the Americas. And one of the issues I go into in this book is the presence in the Amazon rainforest of a very specific, clearly identifiable pattern of DNA, which is only found in one other place in the world, and that is in Australasia, in Papua New Guinea, and amongst Australian Aborigines. It's Australasian DNA. Now,
in South America.
Not only in South America, but in the depths of the Amazon rainforest, amongst tribes who've only been contacted in the last 20 or 30 years. And furthermore, although skeletal remains are rare, it has been found in ancient skeletal remains that are close to 11,000 years old in the Amazon. So that tells us that this DNA signal has been in the Amazon for at least 11,000 years. The geneticists think that it came to the Amazon during the last ice age. And this raises a huge mystery because the peopling of the Americas is supposed to have occurred from Siberia, across the Bering Straits, down through that ice-free corridor into North America, down through North America, into South America, into Central America, and finally into South America. If that was the whole story, then we would find this DNA signal in North America and in Central America. We would not find